what would you say accounts for the prevalence and popularity of Tao Te Ching and Taoism globally, especially in the West? Because there are entire books that are dedicated to studying the wisdom of Taoism, books like Change Your Thoughts, Change Your Life. There's that song by George Harrison of the Beatles, The Inner Light, that drew inspiration from Taoism. Why has Tao Te Ching and Taoist philosophies been so popular in the West?
It's a great question, and that's part of what we're trying to research. And I'd say it's not just popular in the West, though I do think that because it became popular in the West, that helped it spread more globally. A lot of places have read, versions in English and then translated into, for example, the Thai language, or as I said before, Persian, and it's not always direct from China. I think the language grabs people, and it's very simple, but it's also very confusing or very intriguing. And that was my experience, right? When I was 14, I said, oh,
it doesn't make any sense.
But
in the beginning.
Well, but see, it did make sense. If it didn't make any sense, I wouldn't want to engage with it. I mean, there are lots of great works of philosophy, most great works of philosophy. If a regular person would read them, it doesn't make any sense. It's too complex, it's too technical, and requires too much training to even understand what is being said. But the Tao Te Ching is very simple in its language, but because of the way that it's constructed, that simple language is transmitting very complex ideas.
A fun fact that many people may not know is that Lao Tzu and Socrates lived roughly 100 years apart. How would you compare Taoist philosophies to Western philosophies? Are there common elements that are their biggest features?
Yes, I mean, I think that the common elements are the origin of philosophy itself, which is the big questions. What is the universe? What is the origin of the universe? What is our place as humans in this strange world that we are born into? How do humans interact? What is a good way to create society or political organization? These are some of the very basic questions of philosophy, which Lao Tzu is interested in and Socrates is interested in. Socrates also has a famous statement that's something along the lines of, the only thing I know is that I don't know anything. And so he's expressing a kind of, you could say, humility or in awe at the nature of the world, that things are so complex and amazing that he realizes as a limited human, he has to accept the limits of his knowledge. And in the Tao Te Ching, there is this sense, again, with this question of the Tao, you can't even talk about it. Or another famous Taoist philosopher, Zhuangzi, he talks about that knowledge is infinite, but my lifespan is finite. I could never actually understand everything, right? And to try to do that is insanity. So there's a humility, I think, in both the Socratic tradition and the Taoist tradition about humans' capacity to understand the universe, but at the same time, there's a great desire to connect to something bigger than just our individual selves.
We often see quotes from Taoism in popular media, movies, and TV series. Politicians and diplomats like to quote Taoism to enlist the wisdom of the Taoist philosophies. What are some of the most memorable quotes for you?
The famous case that I think of is the US President Ronald Reagan, and he quoted from the Tao Te Ching in one of his State of the Unions. This is the address the US President gives every year. And he said, to govern a great country is like to cook a small fish, right? Again, strange, like a bit paradoxical language. What does cooking a fish have to do with governing a country? To run a big country, you can't poke at the fish too much. If it's a small fish, you need to have it be a small intervention, right? He was promoting a kind of liberalist political philosophy using the Tao Te Ching. Or we have another case, Ban Ki-moon, who was the former Secretary General of the UN. I can't remember the exact event, but he went and visited Obama when Obama was president, and he presented him with 4 characters in Chinese, which was Shang Shan Ruo Shui, right? The highest good is like water. This is from chapter 8 of the Tao Te Ching, because it represents his values and his ideals, that to real goodness is somehow connected to water. And this goes back to what I mentioned before, that softness and weakness, according to the Tao Te Ching, are somehow superior to other ways of being. And so the highest good is like water. As a diplomat, I mean, if you think about diplomacy, diplomacy is all about being soft and negotiating these very delicate relationships. Diplomacy is very rarely blunt force. It's about working with the other side and trying to find space to get along. Even if you're not getting along very much, you're still being very sensitive to the different sides. And that's a softness, right? So for a diplomat to suggest this, or the UN Secretary General, there's some logic to that. But it's very fascinating that that's what he grabbed onto for his own sort of slogan.
Academic and cultural exchanges are such an important aspect of China-US relations, but the fact is there are a lot more people in China that study American culture than the other way around. Professor, would you like to see more people in America take up an interest, not necessarily in Taoism, but in other elements of Chinese culture?
Well, of course, I'm most interested in Taoism, so I think everyone should read the Tao Te Ching. But I think what's most important is human exchange, human interaction, direct interaction. Of course, often to get to that point, you need some other influence or inspiration. Like for me, I wouldn't have ever come to China if I hadn't encountered the Tao Te Ching. And so maybe the first stage is some kind of cultural awareness. But I think travel, to back and forth, meeting people in person is very valuable and probably the most valuable thing. And in the past, we've had things like ping pong diplomacy. And is that because ping pong is somehow the magic thing that gets people to communicate in a harmonious way? No, it's just because people coming together and interacting in a very human way is powerful for promoting harmony, for promoting understanding. And so I would actually probably encourage travel more than cultural exchange, though cultural exchange is valuable as well. And I think part of what I want to do with my center is to encourage exchange, but also to encourage awareness of cultural exchange. Everyone I communicate with around the world, they love the Tao Te Ching. I mean, they could be in Germany, or they could be in Thailand, or in Russia, or in Venezuela, anywhere. And we all are connected through this one book, right? That can function as a way of bringing all different kinds of people together. And to me, that's quite powerful.
We talked about the power of softness in diplomacy. And this year marks the 45th anniversary of diplomatic relations between China and the US. Is there a Taoist wisdom that we can learn to push this relationship forward?
Certainly. The Tao Te Ching is definitely interested in questions of human relations and politics. Even though it's very short, it's only 5,000 words in Chinese, it touches on a lot of topics, right? And one of those topics is politics, but also the principles it discusses, which are very abstract, are applicable to many different parts of life, including international relations, right? I'm not an expert in international relations, but we can think about, for example, softness and weakness overcoming hardness and strength. How do we apply that to international relations? Or there's another great quote from the Tao Te Ching, which is, if you don't trust others enough, they will not be trustworthy, right? And when you have a relationship, especially complicated relationship, trust is very fundamental. So how do you create trust? I think the normal inclination for humans, right, from Lao Tzu's time to our time, is you first have to prove that you're trustworthy, and then I will trust you. And Lao Tzu says, no, first you treat them as though they are trustworthy, and because of that, they will behave and be trustworthy towards you because you're showing them respect.
When you hear that and then trust and verify, you know, both types of wisdom put trust first. You're going to have to start with trust.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you invert trust but verify and say verify and then trust, that's not what Lao Tzu is saying. I'm not sure Ronald Reagan was inspired by the Tao Te Ching to have this statement, trust but verify. But we saw the results of that approach, which was a more harmonious interaction with his counterpart in the Soviet Union. So will Lao Tzu solve all the problems in the world? No. It only has 5,000 words. There's a lot of complicated issues humanity faces and will continue to face. But the wisdom, I mean, I've studied this now for 30 years, and I still find it relevant to many things I never thought it would be relevant to. So yes, in the cultural exchange between different countries, I encourage everyone to read the Tao Te Ching.
Professor, could we end with your favorite quote from the Tao Te Ching of those 5,000 words?
Yes.
There's got to be a couple that you think of often.
I've mentioned a few of them already. I could mention one from chapter 77, which is, the way of heaven is like drawing a bow. The high is brought low and the low is brought high. So if you think about drawing a bow, it's kind of hard to do in a suit. But you pull on the bow and then the top of the bow bends because the two sides bend to the middle as the string gets farther out this way. So the way of heaven is like the drawing of a bow, which means it's a moving towards equilibrium, right? Instead of what is ever high or powerful or wealthy is going to get more powerful, more wealthy, and what is ever weak and poor will get lower and lower. You can use this for interpretation in terms of relations with power or economics or various things, but that there's a tendency, the cosmic tendency is to try to have things move towards the middle, but not have them be exactly the same.
Professor Ted, what an insightful conversation. It's a pleasure to have you on CGTN. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure too. Thank you.